Hello, climbers, and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. In today's episode, Bobby and Adam are going to share what they learned from their GAP assessment. Now, they just recently finished their first ever GAP assessment for their company, and they're excited to share the hard and the good things about what they learned. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
Well, welcome back, climbers. We're excited today to talk about why passing a CMMC audit is so hard. The reason why we're covering this topic, it is fresh on our minds because me and Adam just went through our GAP assessment. So let me just kind of catch you up to speed on current events of where we're at. So we as a company went ahead and signed an agreement with our C3PO. We picked who it is who's going to do our assessment when they become live, because if you're not on current events, CMMC assessments aren't allowed to happen yet because at the time of this recording, the 32 CFR rule has not been finalized and has gone live. So how do we know how well we're doing? We reached out to our C3PO and said, hey, do a GAP assessment of us, assess us, and see how well we're doing in alignment. So score us just like you would if it was assessment time. So that's what we decided to do. And at the end of this, we'll tell you how well we did, but we kind of want to go through the lessons we've learned. And I wanted to bring in Adam because he was instrumental in making that happen. So thank you for joining us, Adam.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, speaking of fresh of mind, less than 7 days ago, we weren't being assessed.
Right.
On Friday, we were being assessed. So, as of recording, we finished our assessment on Friday. We had the weekend. We debriefed internally yesterday, which was Monday, and here we are on a Tuesday recording.
We're bringing it pretty much hot off the press to everybody.
Yep. The ink is barely dried. Actually, we don't even have like our big final report yet. So we do have our scores. So we'll have some fun with that at the end. But
so what I wanted to do is break it down. People love their 5 things. So what we broke it down is 5 things that make this process so hard. And we wanted to bring it down in a more bite-sizable, consumable fashion to help raise awareness about the difficulty of trying to go for your assessment. And you really should kind of, set your tray to the full upright and seat up to the full upright position. Really listen to these things that we're going to be talking about, because if you don't, they could really sneak up and get you for your assessment.
Yeah, and I just know as we were going into our own assessment ourselves, we were trying to set our expectations internally, and what we wanted to, we were sitting there going, yeah, we think everything's great. We're going to get a great, perfect 110 and everything. I'm over here going, Bobby, hold on a minute. We've got some controls out here that are weighted heavily. We could fail this thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot we don't know here. But the way they weight these controls is really interesting. Do you want to talk about that a little bit from your side?
Yeah, so that brings us to our first point, which is the scoring system for the assessment. It is very unique. It is not like any test that I can think of. I don't know about you, Adam. Are you aware of any test or scoring system that operates this way? I'm not really familiar with any.
No, the closest thing I could think of is the scoring methodology for the CISSP exam and some of those weighted procedural exams like that, where they just keep giving you question after question, and you get a point where you fail, and then the test ends. But they don't have one where, question 2 is worth more points than question 3 versus question 4.
Yeah.
It's a little interesting and different.
Yeah, I've taken some Microsoft courses or classes and tests that have a weighted process and how they do it, and they actually have it broken out into different sections. And it was kind of interesting, but the way that the CMMC audit works and the way that they do the scoring system for whether or not you pass is unique from the perspective of there's 110 controls. So think of them as test questions, 110 of them. And the way that they work is if you pass it, it's a point, 1 point, a single point. If you fail it, that same question could have a negative different point. So it could either be a -1 point, it could be a -3 points, or it could be a -5 points. So the maximum amount of negative points you could get on your test, so 0 is not the end, it's not the basement. It's actually a -308, I think, something along those lines, is the maximum negative score you could get. So you could fail every control and you would get well below 110. So that's the way that works. But wait, there's more. So the other additional way that they work that is if you fail any of the 5-point questions, The 3-point questions, it's an immediate fail of the test. So they break those questions down into the 1-pointer, the 3-pointer, the 5-pointers. And if you fail any of the 3 or the 5-pointers, it's an immediate fail. They won't stop your assessment. They'll continue it forward and most of the time. So you'll get a good feel of where you're at. But in theory, you could just straight fail one of those controls and boom, you're done. They got you.
And it's it can definitely be frustrating from the MSP perspective because there's just so much nuance to it. Especially when you drill in, as you mentioned, there's 110 controls, but those 320 assessment objectives, there's a lot there. And it's such a, very complex to try to weave everything together to tell that story. But I get where they're trying to do from it. They're trying to manage their risks around it. They want to make sure they're able to maintain that confidentiality of CUI. But it's a challenge.
Yeah. And we didn't even really get into 320. So kind of what Adam's talking about is in every control, there's they're called assessment objectives or determination statements. But they're basically let's just say we're using 311, right? That one control is going to have 3 or 4 various sub requirements that you have to get those right as well. So when the auditor is assessing you, they're actually looking at all 320 assessment objectives and they're making sure they're all marked off individually. They're going boom, boom, boom. So you could fail one assessment objective of 311 and that 311 is a fail. Doesn't matter that you got most of them. It's like, and then here's the bad part is it cascades, right? So if you fail one of the assessment objectives, then you fail that control. If that control is a 3-pointer, you failed the assessment. Boom. That quickly is how that can kind of play out, which is pretty dangerous. Now, you might think to yourself, well, what is the percentage of those that are 3-pointers and 5-pointers versus the 1-pointers, which you can fail. And based on your score, you can try to correct it over I think it's 120 days, and you can set up a POAM or a plan of action and milestone. It's over 60% of those controls are 3 or 5 points.
Yeah, not a small amount.
No.
But wait, there's a fun one, and I think that this is the good one to kind of when you think through like the scoring system and everything. There is the control that's essentially your big. If you don't have this, it's just game over before you even get you started moving. And that's the control. My brain's mush with all the numbers because we've been going through all controls recently. But it's the control about having your system security plan.
Right. Yeah.
If an assessor finds that you don't have a good system security plan, or you just think that you can somehow go through this without having one, which I don't know why anyone would, but
right.
I'm sure someone has. That's an immediate you're done.
Yeah.
You didn't pass.
And they probably wouldn't let you get past the first phase of your, if you reach out to your C3PO to get assessed. Hopefully they would catch that your SSP is not really there in a good state.
Right, because the system security plan is exactly as it sounds. You're describing the security of the system that you have in place. You're documenting out the system, all its subcomponents, the protections. You get into all 110 controls and all assessment objectives to describe your implementation via policy, technical procedures, etc. And then supplemental information. Our SSP came out to 180 pages of documentation. It was not a small document.
No, not at all. And that makes it really difficult. And it puts a lot of pressure on us to be more prepared to have all of the discussions. Just imagine being prepared to have a conversation about the Star Wars universe, right, Adam? I'm could prepared. Do that. You're very prepared, but I maybe not so much. And your SSP is kind of your universe, and you have to really understand it to a high level because you don't know where they're going to poke. And so you got to be able to speak intelligently wherever they decide to go as they're going through and digging deeper in some of those aspects. Now, they should be following the breadcrumbs of the assessment methodology as well as the actual controls to go through them. So there should be some standardization there. But I mean, everybody's different. They're all unique in how they operate. But I would say this is the number one challenge with your CMMC assessment is the severity and how it's almost all in most of those questions. And it raises the bar for you to be ready. Because if all of it was just a pure percentage score, you're like, okay, well, if I got 1 or 2 of them wrong, we could POAM it. We'll be fine. We're going to really lock things down and be very very detail oriented, but we're human. We can make some mistakes, but at least we have some margin for error. And with the fact that 60% of the questions are straight failed, they just threw that out. You don't have that capability really with that percentage of those being a straight fail. So it just makes it that much harder for you to, we've got to spend a lot more time making sure someone's ready before we try to ascend that hill, because you don't want to fail that one control and then boom.
Yeah, and I think that segues really well into just the assessor question. We've been privileged to work with some brilliant assessors as our consultants, and those people have to be independent from the assessor we actually have chosen. But in going through those and asking questions, we've got some interesting results. Bobby, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we kind of call it the human factor. That would be our number 2 on this, is the human factor. And it's very similar. And I did a post about this, and I kind of equated it to like the Olympics, because that's fresh in our mind. The Olympics just finished up. And you can watch a floor routine, right? And there'll be 8 or 10 judges, and one will be like, that's a 9.5. And another person's like, that's a 5. And you're like, they literally watched the same routine.
Right.
They had the same requirements, and somehow they marked it that much different. So I think when you take in that human factor, that is going to happen. It is absolutely going to be happening. We've had numerous conversations with CMMC assessors, and they can have a variance in opinion on what would be considered met and not met. And then when you add on the difficulty of the way the scoring system is set up, that human factor can really get you.
Yeah, because there's been things just working with our consultants where you and I have gone back and forth about that, and we've had that dance where we've probably spent hours doing it. We finally reached a solution that we think is a good one. We mentioned it to our consultant, who's an assessor, and he goes, absolutely the F not. Are you guys crazy? This doesn't solve anything. This is, no, don't do this. Right. And we're over here like, what?
Yeah.
But then we've told the same story to it.
It's so frustrating when that happens.
Right.
And you got to check yourself. You got to check your ego, and you'll be like, okay, let me understand where they're coming from, because we've got a sacred duty, right, Adam? Like, it's not about us blazing the trail and pushing our clients along, showing everybody that this is the right way to do it. Like, we have to make sure they pass. We've got to help them get through the finish line, and we can't put them in a space that's risky, right?
Right. When we've gone through our process, we've certainly found a few things where we're like, this could be risky. We might be rolling the die a little bit on these certain controls here. We feel that we've built a very defensible argument for ourselves, and we're ready. And if an assessor doesn't agree with us, to be able to say, hold on, we're going to challenge you on this control. We're going to fight this one. But we had to be very careful on that one, because, we don't want to be arguing with our assessor the entire time. We want to make sure that if we are going to pick a fight, it's going to be for something that we feel very strongly about, that we're prepared and we've got all the evidence for. Which, again, if we're already prepared to do that, we should have already satisfied that control to begin with. You don't want to have to build a mountain of evidence to argue a weird scenario there and trying to get cute with a control. But it's complex. In our process of going through doing things, we prepared to fight for every single control because we were just that confident in our implementations. But still, every once in a while, when we would have those conversations with our consultants, we would come back with I wouldn't score you as met for this one. And we're like, even with this mountain of evidence? And they're like, nope. Like, there's this and this and this. And we're like, yep, we had our slice of humble pie, and we had to sit down, shut up, have that slice of pie, and get back to work.
Well, and what that also implies is us as a managed service provider, we have to be involved in the ecosystem and start to understand where a lot of these assessors are landing in some of those more battleground controls. Like, there's certain controls that assessors have a general disagreement on, right? I'm not going to go through and list them and try to stir up some things about it, but just suffice it to say it exists and it happens. So what does that mean?
This podcast is not going to be about FIPS 140-2 validated cryptography anymore?
Nope, we're not going to talk about that, or separation of duties and how you might or might not be able to do that, or do that the right way or not the right way. There's just lots of different ways that assessors, and I've seen some assessors just take some weird approaches on things that I'm like, I don't quite, where did that come from? And so what does that mean? That means that we, as a provider for our clients, have to get into the ecosystem and understand where these different C3POs are coming from and where these assessors, because not all C3POs are going to look at things the same way. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to help steer your client when they're doing the floor routine and they get a 5 when they should get a 9. And that is a very, very bad day. It's something that not a lot of people want to talk about, but that is absolutely the reality. And you have to have a partnership with somebody who has the space, understands, and knows that if you talk with these 3 or 4 C3POs, the way that their approach is the way that you guys are operating should go well. If everybody's doing what they're supposed to, it should play out the way that it should as far as you getting a 110. And you got to have those conversations with those C3POs to know that in advance, because you don't want to find out that their approach on something is kind of wonky based on your assessment live happening at that moment.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely just the breadth of differences we've seen across our consultant base compared to our assessor is very interesting. There's definitely the hardline conservative approach that read through and look for a very literal implementation of the control. Others that will go through and say, I see what you're trying to do here. I understand the spirit of the control and how you're satisfying it. It's really a mixed bag. And then we've even seen some people out there and heard some stories and everything of assessors that'll, go and say, your documentation dates, the dates in your documentations aren't updated to reality. I can't mark this control as met. You fail.
Yeah. They can, and that's like scary because that's a lot of money to possibly go through and reassess. And so I think this comes back to also having a good relationship with your C3PO. You should really talk with them to kind of say, hey, if we get just a stupid, silly mistake on a control and we have to go back to you to reassess again, what does that look like and what's our cost? What's our liability there? You do want to have that conversation with your C3PO, because everybody plans and hopes for that not to happen. You really should plan on trying to understand that, because if you think about the scoring system, how difficult it is, you plan on the human factor, both the people preparing as well as the people doing the assessment. The odds are stacked against you in getting a perfect 110. So you really need to understand that risk and be prepared that if it doesn't go the way you are, that you can, try to turn things around very quickly and then get right to that 110 that you need, so you can go ahead and get on to doing your business the way that you need to do it.
Yep, absolutely. Well said. So I think that segues fairly well into kind of one of our next points that we want to get into, is just that learning curve of stuff. When we look over those controls, we know they're weighted differently. We know assessors may interpret them differently, but the controls themselves don't really do us many favors. I said we're doing the FIPS Hour podcast now, so the use of FIPS validated cryptography. What does that even mean? And then you have to drill through and read into it. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the learning curve? Because especially with our journey here, the Axiom's journey with CMMC started years before I showed up. I'm still technically the new guy here.
Well, I would say number 3 is easily knowing and understanding the environment and the ecosystem you're stepping into. That goes down to being certified. I'm very passionate about whoever you're working with needs to at least have somebody as a CCP certified or a CCA, because you want to have a good understanding when you're trying to tackle these controls and implement them. Just understanding what the control's trying to accomplish doesn't mean that you really truly understand. I understand how my phone in general works, but I couldn't build one. Right. I understand how my car runs in general, but I couldn't build one. And if you're going to step in the space and help clients go, you not only need to understand it, but you need to be able to build it. And that is a completely different level of understanding. And you can't assume anything in that. So that knowledge is so critical in that journey. We have been on this journey for about 3 years. For, I would say, 2.5 was me learning how not to do stuff. When you came on and we tried to do a little bit of a moving where I had taken us forward, what did we end up doing, Adam?
We took everything and put it in the trash.
We threw it out. And I've said this before, you aren't really doing CMMC right if your trash bin is not full.
Yeah, it's CMMC is really trying to push that concept forward of iterative development.
Right.
And even in my own journey doing informal gap evaluations, trying to build up and just lay a basic foundation for CMMC for an organization, just the bare basics. Even in my own history, I've gone through so many iterative versions of my own documentation, my own strategies for it. As I've learned and grown and added more knowledge to that pile, things have changed. It's just that constant evolution, and that makes it fairly difficult to begin with. But then, you go back to those controls, and they are very vague in some places, while also being very specific in other places.
Right. So and what I mean by your bin being full is just like you're talking about. You've got to have those iterations where you're throwing stuff out, you're changing stuff, you're doing that. Because if you just sit there and nail it right off the break, you're like, we've got it. There's no way you got it right off the first swing, unless you're just, your level of understanding of the CMMC ecosystem. But that's my point, is you would have to be in that ecosystem for a good period of time to know. And that's why we threw so much out and evolved and went through and changed. And then when you came on, we're like, we got to start over from scratch. And then we built it in 8 months, 7 months, something like that.
Yeah, went
but
from
that was,
starting
we were able
over
to do that fast because we had already had all of that knowledge.
And we still learned a lot along the way.
Oh, yeah.
And even to that overall point is, so we started about 8 months ago. We threw everything out. We started fresh, started rebuilding. We went through our assessment last week, and the first thing we did Monday morning was sit down and start saying, okay, where do we evolve it from here?
Yeah. We came up with some great ideas. Evolving it even better to make the assessment process that much smoother. Because to me, the way that I feel is your assessment is like the 5-yard line, right? It's the red zone of football. You're trying to get that football in the end zone, and you could literally fumble on the 1-yard line and they take it back for another score, and it is a bad day. And so you've got to be very, 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 very prepared for that, so that when that assessment process plays out, that it is favorable the way that you need it to be.
Yeah.
And now I think this takes us into the next part. Is one of the things that we struggle with so much is the scoping and design of our ecosystem to be assessed. We looked at how we wanted to build our ecosystem. We looked at not just how we needed to pass, but we wanted to include our architecture in our assessment, and that architecture is what we use to support our clients. So we didn't want to have this little back door / small broom closet be assessed that we don't use, right? That is just this little thing over here. And then we get our certification, and you see people do that with SOC and other types of things where they'll have a little part of their thing be assessed, and then they can say they got a certification. That's not what we did. We built a system that we were going to live in and work in and use to support our clients, so that when our clients get assessed, they could leverage the fact that we are living and using it, and that is how we're connecting to them. That is how we're supporting them. But the number 4 on this list is the tools. The lack of tools is just, there just isn't very many that are compliant that we can use, right, Adam?
Right. I've talked before is, I've gone to plenty of conferences over the years. And, one of the places that I spend a decent amount of time is usually the vendor hall, and there's tons of awesome vendors out there. Now, of those vendors, how many of them can actually do CMMC? Or how many of them say they can do CMMC? Maybe 5. How many of them that say they can do it right? Maybe you're lucky if you find one, and it's the same one that shows up at every event.
Right.
There just isn't the tools out there when you look at those requirements out there. Now we're starting to see some more movement in the space. I think one of our big companies, Kaseya, not one of our big companies that we use, but one of the big companies in the space, Kaseya, has said that they're going to make some commitments to CMMC. I think 2 weeks ago, ConnectWise followed suit.
They did.
And said they're going down, and more vendors are coming to the table saying, hey, we're going to go that route. So I really hope that this statement ends up being the one that doesn't age well.
Right.
But as of recording in August of 2024, it's pretty slim pickings in terms of tool sets that we can bring to the table.
Yeah, it's you kind of leave your machine shop with your CNC and all your cool stuff, and then you sort of go to this other shop that's got like chisels and you're going back a little bit to the Stone Age of how you're trying to do stuff, because there just isn't much participation in the ecosystem from the vendors. Now you can bring them in, you can try to use them, but a good assessor is going to fail you on those, because those controls are going to require a certain level of compliance and guarantee. And many of those vendors just aren't used to how to handle that, how to justify that, how to provide that evidence to be able to back up the claims that they say. Because when you're doing in a commercial environment, it's a lot easier to get away with that. But when you're doing an assessed compliant, you've got to be able to have a document that has been reviewed by that organization's legal department that says this is how that vendor does stuff, and we're going to stand behind it, and this is how it is. And just what we find is, right, Adam, not a lot of vendors want to do that. They don't want to get to that level of commitment because their product is evolving and they don't feel very comfortable being that risk, into that step of risk of sharing that much information. So they just don't.
Yep, there's a bit of that. Also, we've talked before, none of the C's in CMMC stand for cheap. That applies to our vendors just the same as it does for us.
Mm-hmm.
None of this is easy as well, and they've got to do their own cost benefit of, if we pivot to support CMMC, will it be worth it?
Yeah.
But there's still other pitfalls to fall behind, and I think, again, we're having the FIPS hour here because you started it. We look at just controls like, again, the requirement for FIPS validated cryptography. There are plenty of vendors out there that say we have FIPS compliant cryptography.
Yeah, that's so
and
bad.
I've gone back and forth with some of our consultants before on that very topic. And the main thing is you can't just say, oh, they're FIPS compliant, so we can go ahead and use them. No, the control says FIPS validated. You can't just look at a control here and say, we'll just write down that we exempted this control or this tool from this control because we like the tool. That's not how it works. A good assessor will sniff that out, find it, ding you on it. If it's one of those 3 or 5 pointers, you're dead in the water already. And do you really want to have that argument only for them to come back and the assessor say it looks like you decided that a control didn't apply to you when it absolutely does?
Right. And also, to me, a very low key, dangerous control requirement that requires some type of technical tool to accomplish is application allow listing. Not a lot of people talk about that requirement in CMMC, but it is absolutely required. And you have to have a mechanism to do something like using a tool like ThreatLocker, which isn't in the compliant arena yet for CMMC. So if you're trying to use ThreatLocker to do application allow listing, you could be in a rude awakening if your auditor catches their approach to how they're doing stuff. And you could be marked as not met, and then you could straight fail your assessment because you're utilizing a tool. Not that I'm trying to pick on ThreatLocker. They said that they're going after their FedRAMP. Hope to God that they do get it and they can step into the space and provide some valuable support. And that's, I think, part of the point that we're trying to make here, right, Adam, is we want more vendors to step in this space because they're desperately needed. And it's going to be like shooting fish in a barrel because there just isn't many in that space. So if you can step in that space as a vendor, you're going to be cleaning up because the people are desperate to try to get tools that are going to be able to help them on this journey because it is not easy.
Yeah, I mean, and to the point on ThreatLocker, we're very familiar with them as a company, what they bring to the table. Great tool, great offering. Really brings a lot of value to the SMB space out there and the MSP community as a whole. For application allow listing, they've been enhancing their product suite. This is not the ThreatLocker sales pitch. I'm not being paid to say any of this stuff. I've got a shirt maybe somewhere around here from a conference because they're soft and awesome. But, we looked at that and said, great, this will solve some problems. We were going through our demo. We had our demo and proof of concept spun up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the updated rule came out that involves security protection data, some clarifications around FedRAMP, and we took the conservative approach and had to do full stop on this.
Yeah.
We don't have a FedRAMP ATO. We can't proceed. And
we've got to move clients into safe waters, right, Adam?
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, if we put a tool in there that is not compliant, we're telling the client to pay for it. Because MSPs, we don't do this for free.
Right.
And Lord knows the good tools aren't free either. If they fail their assessment because we didn't do our due diligence on a tool and their assessor says, nope, that should have a FedRAMP there, and we say, I disagree with you, and they rule, nope, you have to, we're the reason the client just failed their assessment. And in a best case scenario, we get some nasty emails and a very uncomfortable meeting with that client. Most likely case, they're going to want to switch providers pretty quick. Worst case, they might try to come back and throw the lawsuits and legal at you. Now, hopefully, of course, MSAs are up to date and make sure that they've got protections in there and stuff. Still doesn't stop them from throwing that lawsuit out there.
Yeah. And so that just the responsibility and requirement for the managed service provider that's supporting that client is just so high. That's why we put it as number 4, is just the tools and trying to make sure that you have a good offering that is a conservative approach that isn't going to put the client in danger of them failing their assessment. And that's another reason why I like the fact that the MSP is required to get level 2 certified, because at least they should get sniff test. But if you're working with an MSP, be sure that you validate that what they had assessed is what they're using in your environment. Okay, don't fall for that trick.
People,
sometimes.
Processes, and technology.
Right. All right. So let's get to the 5th one, which I think is one that is very on the forefront of us. We made it for last just because I think it's a good one to have as last, and that is the unknown factor. I kind of equate to the CMMC program as us being on a train, heading to a train station that's being built as we're on the track heading there. I mean, that's kind of like what we're in for, right, Adam? I mean, the 32 CFR proposed rule still is proposed. It's not official, which means there could be some deviations or changes. We're not thinking there's going to be much, but there's still that ambiguity out there that, are they going to keep security protection data in the rule? Are they going to remove it? If you're not sure what that is. Are they going to
better define it?
Yeah, are they going to better define it? Like, there's so many things that they're not even security protection data. You could read with Ron Ross looking over your shoulder the 800-171 requirement, right? That standard, and you will not see security protection data anywhere in there.
Right, because 800-171 is the protection of controlled unclassified information, right. not the protection of controlled unclassified security protection data.
No. And so everybody was like, and it, people like us managed service providers, like, it impacted us a lot heavier than it did just our clients. Because if you're just building your own system, it doesn't matter about security protection data in general and controlled unclassified, because most of the time, wherever your controlled unclassified information is going to be is where your security protection. There's some exceptions to that. I'm sure me and you could discuss and argue about that for a while.
Oh, yeah, if we want to go down the exceptions, we'll be here all day. Yeah. But in the interest of time,
my point is, if you're building the system yourself for yourself, it's different than as a managed service provider where you're putting tools and all of that security protection data is flowing into you as an MSP. You've got to account for that. And that is a very big challenge. And that's a big unknown for managed service providers.
Yeah, and I think the approach we had to take on that is one of the sentences that I had to keep reiterating during the course of our assessment is, Axiom is a managed service provider supporting organizations with the defense industrial base, and we have no plans to directly store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information. That is a very true statement. We are not going out to Lockheed Martin and Boeing to do work with them. We're not bidding on those contracts. We're helping those small, medium businesses in the DIB. So we're going to be ingesting that security protection data an awful lot, and we had to make some decisions. Could we have potentially been a little bit more loose with our controls and our interpretation of them? Because, again, we're not going to store, process, or transmit CUI. That's absolutely a true statement. But, again, it's that unknown. We don't know where that final rule is going to come out, if there's going to be further clarifications on security protection data. So we had to make some judgment calls and assume that security protection data equals controlled and classified information where possible.
Right.
There were a few instances where we did have to take some flexibilities and some leeways in the hopes that our assessor would agree, and we were prepared to argue if they did not to try to make our case. But we had to make some decisions, and given that they only say configuration data or log data as their examples, that's a huge unknown. What about your vulnerability scans, your patch reports, your account management database, your software inventory? Is that security protection data? Is that configuration data? I can argue that it is. I can argue that it isn't. So,
Adam, we kind of hinted on the fact that we had just finished our assessment. Do you want to share how our assessment went?
Oh, you're giving me the...
I'm giving you the honor. I'm going to give you the honor.
So yeah, we spent the last 3 days of last week going through our assessment, diving deep into our SSP, going over all 110 objectives, all 320 controls, and all this to really drag this out and really build some anticipation and hype on that by just putting words out there to, again, drag this out and build that hype. But at the end of our assessment, we did walk away with a 110 score from our assessor.
Yeah.
So all this to say,
no small task, that was, easily the hardest thing business-wise I've ever had to do in my life.
Definitely. Just when you look at all the linkages between the SSP, the policies, the procedures, the reoccurring tasks and maintenance checklists, there's a lot there. Especially when you drill into all those 320 objectives that have to be reinforced throughout this entire process.
Yeah.
I think we have well over 500 pages of documentation, if not, closer to 1,000 pages.
Oh yeah.
All for an environment that's pretty small, pretty secluded, not a whole lot there. But that it encompasses, of course, our support tools and whatnot that we'll take to the client. But
right, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it was
Perfect 110 is
it's
not easy to do. It was a lot of work. Just trying to pass, and it would have been considerably easier, right, Adam, for us just to focus on passing ourselves. But that's not what we did. What we had to do is we had to think about how we would pass, but we had to pass in a way that set us up for success on how we're going to support our clients.
Yep.
And that there's no assessment guide or any direction that explains how to do that the right way. There just isn't. So we literally were the tip of the spear trying to figure out how to do that. And so the moment we finished on Monday, we were immediately talking about how we're going to build that and integrate our changes into our matrix and how we're going to do our linkage between our client's security plan and our security plan that will be at the time of the once the assessments start happening. We're going to race to the finish line to get assessed immediately, and then we want our clients then, as they go through their SSP and the matrix, have to connect. We kind of call that the docking station. Is you have to have that built. That system, there's no assessment for that. Right. So you could hire an MSP that has passed, and you could hire us that's passed, and if they don't have a system to do that efficiently, you could still fail. So you've got to really think about that. And boy, are we really putting a tremendous amount of time and effort and thought about how to do that, because we want our clients to inherit as much of what we went through our journey so that they're having to do less. And that's not an easy task. Well, everybody, I appreciate you following us along this conversation about, the 5 pitfalls. We gave you some extra bonus conversations in there about what you need to look out for passing your assessment. This is all based on right off the press of us having our experience with our gap assessment. And I think it's a good telltale sign for us to know where we're going to be. And I think we just wanted to provide that insight to others to try to help them get more in line with what they're going to need to do in order for them to climb that hill as well. So Adam, again, thank you so much for joining us today, buddy.
Yeah, it's nice. Now that we're out of the assessment, I can actually come out a little bit more, talk a little bit more about some of the fun learnings over the last several months.
With that, let's go ahead and close. So thank you again, everybody. And don't forget, keep on climbing.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.